Hello and welcome to this webinar on teaching sustainability through project-based learning. My name is Nadine Early and I am the Academic Director at ATC Language Schools in Ireland. In 2015, world leaders came together and made a promise to secure the rights and well-being of everyone on a healthy, thriving planet when they adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals. These goals essentially are a call for action to promote prosperity while protecting the planet. The idea that individuals and small community groups can take action and that by doing so can help contribute to a better future for all is what drives the approach that we're going to look at today in this webinar. As a pedagogy, project-based learning works to develop those skills and competencies that students need in order to engage with the Sustainable Development Goals. These are some of the skills and competencies that are often referred to as 21st century skills. Here we have the 7 essential project design elements. These are core elements that a good project will have in place, and they provide us with a framework for quality design in projects. So firstly, a good project will have authenticity. It might have an authentic context where students are working to solve a real authentic problem that they've identified, or it might involve the use of authentic tasks and tools, for example, where students design surveys, carry out interviews, and use recording equipment. A good project will also pose a challenging problem to investigate and solve, or a challenging question to explore and answer. With sustained inquiry, a project will aim to provide opportunities for students to engage in active, in-depth research. Critique and revision form a crucial part of any project. They are important for developing those critical thinking skills. Closely linked to critique and revision is the role of reflection, where throughout a project students are encouraged to reflect on their learning. Student voice and choice connect to the idea of ownership. In a successful project, students will feel that they own the project. They will feel that they have been given an opportunity to make their voices heard and their perspectives heard. They'll be given choices and they'll have some control over certain aspects of the project. For example, they might be allowed to decide on the questions they generate, or the resources they will use to answer those questions, or the roles they'll take on as team members within the project group, or the type of final products they will create for their projects. Which brings us to the final element here, the public product. This is the tangible output that these students create where they present their solution to a problem that they have identified or defined. The product might be low-tech, such as a wall poster or an oral presentation, or it might be more high-tech, such as a video, an animation, a digital book, a podcast, and so on. Ideally, the product is public, so students will share the work they create with an audience beyond the classroom. This might be with another class or another school or the school board, or it might be with members of the community. The idea of a public product ties into the idea of authenticity and so leads to increased motivation and engagement. And it also encourages high quality work and from a language learning perspective really pushes students towards target language accuracy. In ATC, we run a project for secondary level students, which we have called Green Voices. We named it Green Voices to reflect the idea of student voice and choice, where students can identify problems that connect with them and their lives, seek solutions to a greener and more sustainable future for them and their community. But also because we wanted to really focus on the development of their speaking skills and support them to create spoken project products such as presentations and podcasts. So the aim is for students to develop the language they need in order to use their voice and talk about a more sustainable future through English. So what I want to do here in this webinar is to share with you some of the things we do on our Green Voices project to help students achieve this aim. So very broadly, these are the steps we take. This is our project framework. I'm going to talk around each of these topics in terms of some of the activities we do and the type of language support we offer. So the first step in the framework is to establish the broad topic area and key content ideas, that is, sustainability and the Sustainable Development Goals. We do this with a gallery walk activity, which gets students up and moving about the classroom as they explore a range of photos on the walls. Beside each photo is a blank page, and students are encouraged to write down words and phrases, thoughts and ideas and questions about what they see, using a see, think, wonder technique to activate background knowledge and language. So what do you see? What do you think is going on? And what does it make you wonder? Contributions can be in the target language, in this case English, or the student's L1 or mother tongue, where they are offered for translation afterwards. Because the aim is to get their ideas out onto paper, to activate their background knowledge on this, and to begin to co-construct sentences and questions around the topic area. Then, using that language, students work together to co-create a definition of sustainability, to begin to verbalize in English their understanding broadly of the topic area. This is done as a pyramid discussion where students start off working in pairs, then share their ideas with bigger and bigger groups until they are working as a whole class. Throughout each stage, students have to agree in their groups on their definition until we have a whole class consensus. So the definition has been refined at each stage, both in terms of meaning and in terms of linguistic accuracy. The talk here is exploratory. They are exploring the core concepts, and it's important for them to come up with their own ideas and definitions. With the pyramid discussion, they can give and receive plenty of peer support in target language use and also in understanding the concepts being discussed. The activity has a communicative target, so it's very meaning focused. There's no requirement at this stage for students to produce accurate target language output in their discussions. However, the aim is to eventually arrive at an accurate target language definition of sustainability. Once we have established the concept of sustainability, the next step then is to introduce the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. This we do with an animated video which is available on the UN website. It's a good idea to use an active listening technique to ensure engagement with the content, such as a KWL table. After the listening, students are directed to the UN website where they begin to explore the 17 goals. The aim here, in addition to looking at the goals, is to help students navigate the website, understand how the information there is organized and where they can find key points about each of the goals. We do this with a jigsaw reading technique where students work in goal groups and are given 1, 2, or 3 goals to read about. Students are given a structured note-taking frame where they're guided to take notes about what they are reading. Afterwards, they present to the rest of the class on what they found out about their goals, Students, as they listen to their classmates talk about their goals, they should complete their note-taking frame so that by the end of the activity they have a page of notes on all 17 goals, including a translation of the key information back into the mother tongue. For example, the aim of the goal, because we want to establish key concepts at this stage, and these concepts need to be established in both the target language and the mother tongue. Then, to refine their understanding, they are asked to categorize the goals into two categories. Those with a planet focus, for example, goals that deal with climate change and habitat loss, deforestation, pollution, and goals with a people focus, so goals dealing with poverty and hunger and health and education and equality. As the goals can be printed out, as we see them here on 17 separate cards, each a different colour with a clear visual icon, this activity can be organised as a nice kinesthetic activity. The next step in the framework is to move the students into thinking about how some of these goals connect to them and their lives, to personalize the content, and also to begin to narrow the focus a little. Listing and ranking are two great activity types for structuring a speaking task. So here students have to agree on the most important goals and rank them in order of importance. Then, narrowing the focus, students begin to consider actions that might be taken to support one of these goals at the individual and community level. We can support them in this, both in terms of language support and thinking support, by providing them with some creative sentence starts. As a thinking support, these question starts might help them understand the type of thinking they need to engage in, creative thinking involving supposing and hypothesizing, predicting, and so on. Then, to support them in using these question starts to develop target language sentences, we might provide them with a substitution table. So once students have begun to make connections between some of the goals and their lives, and have begun to consider what actions they might take individually or as part of a group, we can begin to move towards a project focus. We can do this by giving students some real case studies to research, case studies of projects carried out by other young people. The aim here is to help them begin to think about the different types of projects that they might work up. They can work in case study groups where each group gets a different case study to read about, and they're tasked with discussing it in their groups under a number of headings where they have to describe the problem that the young people in their case study wanted to address and outline what was done to solve it or improve it, describe the benefits or impact of the project, and decide if they found the project inspiring. Then they must present back to the whole class on their case study, and perhaps the class might vote on the best one. Some techniques that might be used at this stage to support students with this task are text mediation, where texts outlining the case studies are mediated to make them more accessible to students, and the provision of speaking frames. Then, based on their discussions up to this point, and taking the case studies that they've just read and listened to as an inspiration, they now have to decide on a project focus for their own group. They have to decide on either an individual action or a community group action that they think will help create a more sustainable future, either for their school or for their community in general. They have to identify and define a problem and decide on a possible action, and if they can, outline what they think the impact or benefits of this action might be. Their ideas then will be reported back to the rest of the class, and ideally there should be some element of whole class response here. This can be left very open or guided with set questions such as, is this group's problem clearly defined? Is their solution to the problem practical? Will it work? Will it have an impact? Why? Why not? And so on. If you want to run one project with the whole class, then at this point the class should hold a vote to decide on which idea to move forward with together as a project. If groups are working on different projects, then at this stage they take the feedback from their classmates and revise their ideas accordingly. Notice the opportunities here for some of our elements of good project design. This is the stage where we bring in the element of a challenging problem, and we can also provide for student choice here, where the students get to decide what issue or problem they want to focus on. And we can provide opportunities for critique and revision when we ask the class to respond to each group's ideas and to revise and amend their ideas based on feedback received. Once an area and an action for focus have been decided on, students need to write a project driving question. The driving question will be written around the challenging problem that has been identified. It is the question they will answer with their project. It's the question they'll keep coming back to throughout the project. It should help them focus their project and narrow it down to something manageable. It should encourage students to use higher order thinking skills, and ideally it will lead to sustained inquiry, where the deeper they delve in order to answer their question, the more questions they will have along the way. Students are supported in writing their driving question by considering the different elements that a good driving question will have. So, clearly it will have a question word, how, should, what, could, and so on. It should have an action taker, I, we, our class, our group, our community, our school, and so on. It must have an action, the what of the experience. What final product will they make, or what service will they provide? And it will have a recipient, the who of the experience. Who will receive the project, product, or the service? And the impact, the why of the experience, the purpose, the ultimate goal. The driving question acts as a springboard into the next step, which is developing a project action plan. Looking at their defined problem and their driving question, students begin to ask, okay, what do we need to do? What do we know already and what do we need to find out? How are we going to share the knowledge and information with the recipient? What format is it going to take? Will it be a podcast or a presentation with slides or an infographic or a TED Talk, public event, a photography exhibition? And what do we need to figure out in order to do that well? And importantly, how will we know if we're making an impact? How will we know if we have achieved our goal? What will success look like? What will it look like when our problem is solved? This is where the students need to be very clear about stating their goals and their objectives and what tasks or actions they need to complete in order to achieve them. On Green Voices, we spend time here establishing what the different components of an action plan are by looking at a very simple example of an action plan written in clear, simple, well-graded language, and students are tasked with matching the different elements of the plan to these headings, and then they are tasked with developing their own action plans. Another opportunity for critique and revision presents itself here, where you can ask your students to carry out a SWOT analysis of each other's action plans. Or if they're not ready to carry out such an analysis, you could ask them to analyze just the strengths and weaknesses of the plans. Once again, it's a good idea to do this firstly with a model action plan so that the class works on analysing it together in order to establish both the thinking and the language needed to do this independently. Students can then work on revising and improving their plans based on peer feedback received. On Green Voices, we ask students to add their action plans to a digital project wall. A project wall is a physical or digital space where students can display and showcase and organize their work, their ideas and their progress throughout the duration of a project. In addition to being a place where students can log their action plans, project walls can also provide a place where students can save their project resources with links to websites and articles and so on. They can save product exemplars, that is, models to help students understand what quality work looks like. So for example, if students are creating presentations, give them links to good TED Talks as exemplars. Or if they are creating podcasts, give them links to podcasts to listen to, and so on. They should have a language corner where they can log new language that they meet along the way, language that they have identified as being useful for their project. So this might be topic relevant vocabulary that they meet during their research, or it might be functional structures and phrases that they seek out to help them communicate about the project. It might contain links to online dictionary definitions where they can listen to the pronunciation of vocabulary items and explore collocation and usage. The quality criteria for project work and final products can also be made available to students on the project wall, which they can use to support self and peer critique. And if the projects are to be assessed, then the assessment rubric might be added too, so that students know what success in the project looks like as they work through it. And of course, any project artifacts that are created by the students, either individually or in their groups, should be added to the wall. So presentation slides, infographics, podcasts, scripts, recordings, and so on. Obviously, project walls will not be completed in one activity, but are added to over the course of the project. So once the action plans have started to take shape, it's time for students to carry out some research. The time frame you have for the project, along with the age and level of the students, will dictate how much research they will be expected to do. Research should start with a list of need-to-know questions, which will come from the driving question. These are meaningful and productive questions that you can frame your project around. If the whole class is working on the same project, then students should work in groups to ask as many questions as they can, and all contributions should be gathered in, and then some questions are prioritized over others by asking which questions really get us to the heart of our project. As with any other element of broadening knowledge within the project, in a monolingual class, students might be allowed to write their questions in the L1, and then you can help them translate. Research can incorporate different ways of finding answers, mixing the traditional idea of research with other learning experiences such as field trips or interviews with experts or end users. Students can be given choice here and tasked with finding resources in their groups to help answer their need-to-know questions. But of course, this will depend very much on the age of the learners and their linguistic competence if researching in the target language, and indeed their level of media literacy. Or we can scaffold research processes somewhat. For example, teachers can provide links to specific resources. Or we can take these authentic resources and mediate them to help reduce the overall complexity of the input so that they become accessible for students. We can do this in many different ways. We can simplify the text by reducing the amount of information on the page or by grading the language. We can reorganize the text by organizing the content under clear headings and subheadings. Or we can represent the key concepts visually for the students with a diagram or a table. And of course, we can highlight keywords and phrases or provide a glossary of key vocabulary with the text. Another idea for supporting students in their research is to use research stations. These allow students to support each other by approaching the research using different skills and meeting along the way to share their findings and ask and answer questions of each other. For example, the stations might be set up in 4 different parts of the classroom, with students starting on either the writing or speaking station. The writing station can consist of pre-reading or pre-listening activities where students are tasked with writing some questions they hope to have answered, or some key words and phrases they expect to read or hear. They can also be set some post-reading and listening activities which they come back to afterwards. Note that we can differentiate some of the activities here. The activities in the reading station can be left very open, as with the first activity here, or they can be more structured. In the listening station, students can listen to a podcast or a recorded presentation made by the teacher or watch a video. This will be on the same content area, giving students different exposure to the input, and is important for oral learners or those who struggle with reading. For differentiation, students who need extra support could be given the transcript to read as they listen. Setting a listening task is important. Again, this allows for a differentiated approach where some students can be asked to listen and take notes or listen and write a summary, while others can be asked to listen and note down keywords or phrases. Notice that the last listening activity here, listen and write a follow-up question, guides the students towards sustained inquiry, one of the 7 elements of good project design. Like the writing station, the speaking station can have a pre and post listening and reading element. So students can be tasked with talking together to discuss what it is they want to find out when they get to the reading and listening stations. They can then regroup afterwards to discuss and compare what information they got. Again, it can be left very open or can be more tightly structured. In other words, students can be left to talk freely in the target language, but allowed to use L1 when they need to, or they can be allowed to do the stage entirely in L1 if they want, in order to facilitate exploratory talk about the content. Or they can be given sentence starters or sentence frames to work from. The good thing about using research stations is that they show students that research doesn't simply involve reading and taking notes. It also includes planning, thinking beforehand about what you want to find out, discussing with other people about what you already know and what you want to know and what you have discovered, reviewing the process and checking how others approach their research and what similarities and differences there are. So it's a very collaborative approach to research. It's also a more fun and dynamic way of carrying out research and moves away from the more traditional lockstep approach. So finally, we move into the final stage of the project, which is creating the public product as a final project output. This can take any form really, but should be something tangible that can potentially be shared publicly. As a piece of output, it may take the form of spoken output, such as a presentation, a podcast or video, a recorded interview or a play. Or it might take the form of a piece of written output, such as a digital book, a flyer or a poem. Many of these products will contain an integration of speaking and writing. For example, scripting interview questions or scripting podcast dialogues or writing and then performing a play or writing and then reciting a poem and so on. What is important here when it comes to language is the understanding of the standard expected in language production. This final piece is the display piece. Having a public audience outside of the classroom is hugely beneficial as it encourages students to really attend to their language and move from the use of emerging exploratory language, which they use throughout the project as they explore the concepts and begin to articulate them in their own words, and towards the production of accurate standard language, which they use to display or demonstrate their learning. On our Green Voices project, the learning is demonstrated through one or two speaking activities as project products. With students with a higher level of English language proficiency, we use podcasts. A podcast allows students to share their knowledge and demonstrate their learning orally through a mixture of monologue and dialogue. They provide a great format for giving students a voice and provide lots of opportunities for student choice as they decide in their project groups how to format their podcasts, or what names to give them, or what roles they'll take within the podcast, or what music to use, and so on. There is also less pressure with a podcast because of the opportunity to script, practice and record, review, edit, improve, re-record, and so on. And it removes the pressure that many students feel when asked to stand up and give a presentation. Students will analyse podcast exemplars first, working together to generate a list of criteria outlining what makes a good podcast before going on to script and then record their own podcasts. For other students, we use presentations as final products, and we like the idea of combining writing, speaking, and creativity by using infographics, which students create in their project groups in order to display their learning, and which also act as a focus for their presentations. Creating infographics is a good way to help students focus on sentence level writing, perhaps with a "Did you know?" question and short answer format, or a 10 facts about format, and so on. Again, by analysing exemplars of infographics, students can consider what makes a good infographic and how to best convey information in a concise way that, along with images and graphics, will capture the attention of the intended audience. So to sum up, by moving students through a framework that supports them to consider themes of sustainability from a broad general perspective towards a more personal perspective, we can help them to articulate a personalised response to one of the many challenges facing the world today. We can do this by offering a variety of supports in the initial stages, where their output is exploratory and there should be little or no pressure for linguistic accuracy. Then, as the focus is narrowed, and within the context of creating an engaging public product for presentation, we can encourage attention to language and the accurate use of target language features at this final output stage. And if we can work into our framework as many of these elements of good project design as possible, then there's no reason why a robust project on sustainability cannot be carried out through another language. Thank you.